going to walk you through the basics of creating your own oil paintings. Hi, I'm Lisa, the artist behind Lachri Fine Art. In today's video, we are going to be covering the supplies, the techniques that I use, how I blend my paint, and even how I set up my palette. So let's get started by taking a look at the supplies that I'm using. Okay, starting out, you are going to need to choose your canvas. I have gone for this project with a Belgian linen board by Fredrix. A stretched canvas is also a great way to go because you have something to grip onto as you're painting. With the canvas boards, that is a little bit difficult because when you've got wet paint, there's not a whole lot for you to grip onto. Whereas here, you can hold it from the edge without touching the wet paint. Now for the style of painting that I like to work in, I like to go with a very, very smooth canvas. If you go with a canvas that is too rough, it makes it really hard to blend. I recommend avoiding rough canvases or canvases that are really cheap little generic ones like from Walmart. Those are actually going to make it so much harder for you to paint just because of the way they absorb the paint and the way the paint glides over, or it doesn't glide over in that case. It definitely does make a difference, and it is much easier to learn to blend and paint on a nice smooth canvas. Next, you are going to need paint. The black and the white paint that I like is by Weber's Per Malba. The black is super, super black, and I know people will freak out, don't ever use black. You know what, I use it all the time, but I glaze color on top of it so that it's not flat. I love the results I get. Love that black paint. The Weber's Original White is also a really nice consistency, great paint. I don't love their other paint, but I love the black and the white. For the rest of the paint, I am going to be using Winsor Newton today. I've got a combination of the Artist Oil color and the Winsor Winton color. When you're just starting out, the Winsor Winton color is a perfectly fine paint to work with. You're probably not going to notice a huge difference. The Artist color tends to be a little bit creamier, and it comes in more colors. The names of all of these colors that I used in this project will be listed below in the video description. Now, when I start this painting, I'm only going to be using 3 colors. Next is my mixing medium. I am using Liquid Original for this. This is a fast drying medium, so what I paint today will be dried tomorrow. Next, we are going to need paint brushes. I am blending most of my work when I work wet into wet with this mop brush. This is a Royal Soft Grip. I will put a link to this in the video description. This sheds like crazy, so I don't use it a ton. I just use it to get rid of some of my initial brush strokes. I know a lot of people will ask, why don't you just use the makeup brushes that you use in your acrylic paintings, because those don't shed so bad? Because these, you're going to need several of. This brush has to be 100% dry to work. When it gets wet because you cleaned it for the day, it's not going to be ready to use for several days, so you're going to want several. So these are very, very low cost. They're great for oil painting. But if you do want to invest a little bit more money, the makeup brushes definitely work great as a mop brush. Next, I've got these stiff round brushes. These are a very inexpensive brush. You can get them in a lot of beginner kits. I don't use them generally for applying paint to the canvas, but I do use them for certain blending techniques. The next set of brushes that I'm using are synthetic hog hair bristled brushes. I've got 2 number 10 filberts and a number 4 liner brush. The next item that you're going to need is a roll of Viva paper towels. Can't stress this enough, it needs to be Viva. No other brand is going to work the same. This is very cloth-like. Your other option would be to use an old t-shirt or old rags that you don't want anymore. But don't try using Bounty or any of the other paper towels. They don't work the same. They don't play well with the paint thinner or the oils. Now, for the paint thinner for cleaning your brushes, I use Mona Lisa odorless paint thinner. This is the same stuff that you guys see me use with colored pencil work all the time. This stuff really is odorless, but don't let that fool you. It's not non-toxic. You don't want to drink it or leave it out where your kids or your pets can get to it. Be very careful with that. But it really is odorless, whereas some of the terpenoids and turpentines and the natural stuff, the smell for me gives me an instant headache, and I can't even go near them. I actually don't even let my students use those in class because of the instant headache it causes. I've been using this for over 15 years and love it. You're going to need a container to put that in. I'm using the Mona Lisa brush tank. Now, the thing to keep in mind with the paint thinner, it will leak out of just about anything you put it in. So make sure that you keep this upright. You don't want this rolling around in the car because it will leak out of it. If you can find something that has a rubber type seal, that works better. It'll still leak out of this, just not as severely as it will these jars. These jars are just way more convenient to clean your brushes though. The next on my list is the Masters brush cleaner. This is the last step that I use when I clean my brushes. Now, I do have a video showing you exactly how I clean my brushes when I'm done painting. I will have a card pop up, so definitely check that out because it is really, really important for making sure that your brushes last a very long time. If you don't clean them properly, you're only going to get a couple of uses out of them. The last thing on my list is my palette, which is clearly too big to fit on camera. This seals out air. It's like a giant Tupperware. So when I'm painting, not only does it keep my studio assistants from being able to get in or walk through the paint, which is definitely not safe. Besides the liquid, which is fast drying, the paint itself will stay wet for a week or two. So I can keep using the paint in the palette without having to throw it away every time I'm done painting. And my palette is just a piece of tinfoil wrapped over a canvas board that fits inside of that to hold it in place. You have several options for palettes. There are disposable palette pads where you just throw the pad away. A lot of my students use that. Very easy. You do waste a lot of paint that way because you can't store it. What you want to avoid are palettes like this. This is best for acrylic. This is not at all suitable for oil paint, just the way that we mix, which I'll show you later. Now, the big thing that everyone is always afraid of when it comes to oil painting is creating mud. This happens because people overblend wet paint. It's really easy not to have this happen. You just need to figure out where you need to stop and let your paint dry before you do your next layer. So we will be talking about this later in the video. But I just want to let you know it's not as scary as it sounds. If you are supporters over on Patreon, the real-time version of this tutorial is available for you now, so make sure to head over and check that out. Now let's get on to this painting. Starting off, I'm going to put liquid in the center. I will have a sheet over on my website that shows you exactly how I set up my palette every time, because so many of these colors look the same when they're on the palette that you might accidentally find out once you hit the painting that you have blue when you thought you had brown. So here I've got the liquid in the center. That bottle should have been shaken up better so that I didn't have the difference between the thin and the thick there. I'll have to stir that up with my paintbrush. You don't need very much of the oil. You can see I put out very, very little of that. With oil paint, a little bit of paint goes a very long way. Now the brushes that I'm using today are this stiff round brush. I've got a synthetic hoghair filbert, that is the next one, and then a synthetic hoghair liner brush. Now I've drawn my apple out in graphite. I do not spray a sealer over that because when I paint, I want those graphite lines to work out. I don't want them to stay there or to show through my very thin layers that I'm going to be doing next. I know some people will like to spray a sealer to make sure the graphite doesn't smudge. I don't want that graphite to stay there, so there is no spray for me. Now I'm going to take some of my liquid and I'm going to mix that in with my paint. I don't want to just put thick, chunky paint all over the canvas. It would take forever to dry. It's not going to blend well. It would be too opaque. So by mixing the liquid in here, I'm both lightening this up so it will be more translucent, but I'm going to get a very nice flow to my paint. You can see I'm just mixing that right in. Now I'm ready to go onto my canvas. Now to keep this simple so that you don't get too overwhelmed with color, I am just using raw umber, black, and white for my first day of painting. I'm going to block in my background. I don't care about my brush strokes too much at this point. I just want to get that canvas covered. I'm going to be using a soft mop brush to blend out or soften the edges of those brush strokes. There's the mop brush. I'm just go over, make a couple of brush strokes with that. You can see it softened everything out, or blurred it all out, I should say. Next, I'm going to add some black paint into the raw umber to start building up my shadows. I still am using a little bit of liquid here, but I don't want to use too much because there's already liquid on that canvas. If you've got a wet canvas, you have to balance out how much mixing medium you're using on additional layers when it's still wet. Notice all my messy brush strokes there. That is all fine. I'm going to take my mop brush and soften those out. The thing with the mop brush is don't overblend. I just need a few strokes in any given area so that I can get that to where it's soft. I don't want to completely blend the black into the brown. This is where people have trouble getting muddy paint, where they overblend. I just need a few strokes and that is it. Just soften that up. So once that is blended out and I pick out any loose hairs that came off from that mud brush, I can start on the apple. I've mixed some white in with the raw umber, and I'm just blocking in loosely where everything is going to go. Again, I'm focusing more on my values here. It doesn't really matter about colors. I'm not having to stress out about that because I've simplified it by just using these three colors: white, black, and raw umber. I'm going to put the color all on top of this with glazing once this dries. Blocking in all those shadows, I am mostly using that filbert brush, the synthetic hoghair. Blended that out with the mop brush, just like I did the background. And now I'm going to add some white paint on top of that for my highlights. Blended that out again. Just like the background, only a few brush strokes is needed with that mop brush in order to get that smooth finish. If you keep blending and blending, you will lose all your lights and your darks. So don't overdo that. Now doing these first layers just with the three colors, we're going to avoid having too much mud. But the main problem that people have with oil paints is coming out with a muddy background or muddy colors. And that happens because they're over blending and not letting it dry in between layers. If you can let it dry between layers and not over blend, then it won't be a problem for you at all. Oils are actually not that hard to work with. I think they're easier than acrylics. So I'm using the liner brush there to get the little details in that leaf, and I do have the video that went up on Saturday showing you guys how to use a liner brush. I'll have a card pop up here so you can check that out if you missed it. Just hyping up my contrast here. I want to make sure my values are really good. Getting some little dots on the apple in gray. Now this looks like harsh dots, but don't worry, once we put the green over it, it will look just right. Now I'm going to let this dry overnight, and the next day we can come back and start putting the color in. Now when I blend the color, I'm taking liquid again like I did before, and I'm slowly pulling the two colors that I want to use into each other. Now I know you can't really see the colors that I'm using here, but notice how I'm not just taking a big glob of one color and stirring it into the next. I'm slowly pulling them into each other, pulling green into the turquoise and then the turquoise into the green. What ends up happening is I have several values to choose from here where it fades from green over into the turquoise so I can mix just the right color. I know a lot of times people will use a palette knife to mix their oils. Don't do that. That is a great way to waste a ton of paint. And you can see here, I don't need a lot of that color. A little bit goes a very long way. So now I'm going to start blocking that in on my background. If you put paint on an area and decide, oh my gosh, this looks terrible, I need to remove it, just take your paper towel and you can wipe some off. You can easily lift stuff off because what's behind it is already dry. The key there is letting that first layer dry. So what we're doing here is actually glazing. And I can just keep layering these colors until I get them just how I want them. Adding a bit of white for the highlights here. That is the zinc white, which is fairly translucent. It does have a blue tint to it, so be aware of that if you use the zinc white. Whenever I need to clean my brush, I just wipe that off on my paper towel. Now I know some people will use paint thinner in with their paint as they paint. I do not. I just use the liquid. So blocking in the colors I want, and then I'm taking this stiff round brush and I'm softening it out. I'm just smudging that around. Now, as we move on to the apple, I am going to be blending my yellow. I've got a little bit of green left on the brush from the background, so I'm mixing that in with that yellow. But see how fluorescent that is? I'm going to tone that down by taking a color that is its complementary, which would be red. I've actually got light red here that I'm mixing in with this. And just a teeny tiny bit of that is going to tone that down. I still want a fairly light kind of lime green yellow, but I don't want it to be fluorescent. Now on to painting the apple. You can see I'm using a lot of liquid here. This is a glaze, and I'm essentially just tinting the color. You can still see the dots from underneath. You can see everything that I had previously done. I'm taking more of the raw umber to build up my shadows again, just strengthen those a bit. You'll see me use that stiff round brush quite a bit for blending my edges out. I'm darkening this up. I've added a little bit of olive green into the green color I was using before. And as this is wet, I'm using less and less liquid with each additional layer. If you use too much liquid or too much of your mixing medium, the paint won't stick to the canvas anymore. Once it dries, you can continue going back to using more liquid. Added my highlights on top of there. Shading in the leaf, and you can see I'm going right over the veins that I had done before. They still show through because the colors that I'm using are very translucent. You'll see that I'm adding these colors right over the black that I had used earlier. This gives me a much richer tone than just having flat black. Using the liner brush to pull out details around the edges. Now when you're oil painting, if you get to a point where all your colors are just kind of muddying up and mixing together, stop. Let it dry and continue the next day. That's the key to not having muddy paintings with oils. Just let it dry and then come back to it later. I'm going to soften out this back edge here. Because this paint is all wet, it's really easy to smudge the colors into each other. So now I'm on my last day of oil painting. I'm doing another glaze with that bright green color. I'm going to use some of the light red that I used in the background for the shadows on the apple. And you can see it just gives it such a nice rich tone by adding that and not just sticking with the brown. deepening up some of the shadows in the center of the apple. And the last day, I'm generally just doing little final detail work. Cleaning up edges, you can see I'm using more white here. I'm going to make the highlight on that apple really stand out. Adding a little bit more of the white on the shelf. And there is not a lot of paint on my brush. That's the big thing here. You don't need thick, gloppy paint. And that is about it for this guy. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. My reference photo for this one comes from Paint My Photo. I will put a link in the video description, and this photo of my painting will be available over on my website. So if you want to paint this one like I have, you are more than welcome to use this. Thanks for watching. Again, if you are supporters over on Patreon, the real-time version of this painting is available for you guys now, so make sure to head over and check that out. If you're new to my channel, I have new video critiques every Tuesday where I'm critiquing your original paintings or drawings, my own speed paintings, drawings, and tutorials every Wednesday, art Q&A videos every Thursday, and artist vlogs every Saturday. So if you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe so you don't miss out on anything. And you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google+. All of those social media sites are linked below in the video description where you can keep up with news, my newest work, and see real-time clips of whatever it is I'm currently working on. I'll see you guys tomorrow. I'm not generally a huge fan of apples, but after painting this, I totally went and bought some. They're great apples too. Maybe I should have bought them before I painted it, and then I could have used my own reference photo. See, I told you it wasn't that hard to oil paint. It's just a matter of layering.